now.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our housing conversation, and thank you for joining us this morning, and obviously running the conversation in a slightly different format this morning. My name is Chris Ashman. I'm Director of Regeneration here at the Isle of Wight Council, and as some of you will have known, we've been running these conversations for some time towards progressing our housing needs agenda. This is the first time we've run it in this format, and it's for obvious reasons in terms of social distancing issues. But what we're hoping to do is still have as much interaction as we usually do in our conversation piece. And there is a Q&A session on your screen where you'll be able to actually post questions on each of the topics for this morning's conversation. And we'll attempt to answer as many of those questions as we can as we go through the agenda. What we're going to have this morning are updates regarding the housing needs survey, thinking around obviously the impacts on our island planning strategy, and an update on the position with that. The key document then translating that analysis into the housing strategy and our building together campaign. I think the key point this morning really is that clearly we'll be sense checking everything that we've been doing so far in the context of the lessons learned from the impact of the pandemic and how we've responded to that, and how that might influence our strategies going forward. So your input and comments on that are really welcome. We've clearly had some direct impacts already in terms of the numbers of people presenting as homeless. Government interventions to support the vulnerable homeless in particular, and obviously then impacting and shining a further light, if anything was needed, on the affordable housing agenda on the island. So I'm going to hand over now to Danica Barber from our intelligence team to provide us with some feedback on the housing needs survey. Over to you, Danica.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear and see me okay. I know it was a bit dark when we practiced this. So, as Chris said, my name's Danica Barber. I'm a senior public health analyst for the local authority, and I lead on the housing needs survey, which we undertook earlier this year. There's a slight delay on the slides, so I apologise if I'm pausing through the presentation. So the methodology for the slides is we had, for the survey, we had two different surveys that we ran. The reason for this was due to differences in methodology. So one was an online only self-selecting completion survey, and this allowed people to tell us everything they wanted to tell us. It was promoted through town and parish councils, and very much was aimed at giving us information at a local level so we could really understand in a local area what the issues were. We had a very varied response rate to this. In some areas, lots of people completed it. In some areas, not very many. So we can't use that information for island level analysis because it's too varied. So in order to fill that gap, we also carried out a postal survey, which we commissioned through an external agency. This gave us a representative sample across households on the island, both in terms of age and location, which is much more robust for the whole island analysis. We had planned to do a telephone survey to follow this up for those hard to reach demographics, but unfortunately due to COVID, this didn't happen. So there are some demographics which are slightly less represented, but it's still pretty robust for what we need. So we had just under 1,500 responses from across the island. Over half of those people owned their own homes, but actually the difference in age was really marked. So over 65s, there were 78% of people who owned their own home. And in the under 45s, it was 7.5%. So more than 10 times as many in the over 65 category own their own home. There were 7 out of 10 people who'd been in their home for longer than 5 years. But again, the age difference is quite marked. So in the over 65 category, nearly 80% of people own their own, been in their home for more than 5 years. But in the under 45s, less than 40%, so quite a difference in kind of people's circumstances. But across all age ranges, the majority of people were living in a 2 or 3 bed house, and that was fairly similar. And there was a fairly even split across all the different types of housing. But the type of house that they lived in varied by age, even though the size might be the same. So in 75% of our 16 to 24-year-olds are living in flats or maisonettes, whereas in our over 65s, a quarter are in bungalows and a quarter in detached houses. And obviously the size of the house and the number of bedrooms impacts on whether people feel they have sufficient space. So this is one of the questions that we asked. And again, very different in different age groups. So the over 65s, the overwhelming majority, 98%, have got plenty of space. They're quite happy with the amount of room they've got. Whereas in the 25 to 34 category, almost 1 in 5 of them don't have sufficient space in their house. So we also asked a question about whether people were receiving help with their rental mortgage. By this we mean things like housing benefit, and 80% of respondents don't receive any help, but actually surprisingly more older people are receiving help than younger people. I definitely had the preconception that younger people were more likely to be on housing benefit, so that was interesting for me. So around 78% of over 65 received no help. Sorry, Maisie, but I think it's 86.9 of the younger people were not receiving help. So we also asked people about whether they were anticipating a move in the next 12 months, and the majority of people weren't, but the 6% who did respond, we looked at those a bit more. So of those who wanted to move, most of them were looking for a 2 or 3 bed property, and the reasons were different depending on age. So the 25 to 34s were looking for a larger home. 82% of those who wanted to move were looking to upsize to a 2 or 3 bed property. Whereas in the over 65 market, they were looking to downsize to a 2 or 3 bed property, and that was 41% of those. So we asked people how they were going to fund their move, and around half of 25 to 34-year-olds expecting to move are looking to buy with a mortgage as opposed to rent. A lot of these were in rental currently and wanted to buy their first home. And around a third of all ages wanting to move were looking to move off island. But depending on age, it was different, the driver for that. So for the over 55s, very much they were looking to move nearer to family and friends, and that's why they were leaving the island. Whereas younger people, being closer to their work was the stronger driver for them moving away. We asked about the price that people were willing to pay, and this varied again with age. Under 35s able to pay less, willing to pay less than the older people. And around 150 to 200,000 was the most common for an under 35 that they were willing to pay, whereas it was more around the 250,000 mark for the older age range. But interesting, the maximum rent and mortgage people were able to pay reduced with age, and this might be due to expectations about future earnings or perhaps their previous experiences with how much they've paid up till now, and therefore their expectation of what's reasonable. So the 25 to 44-year-old category, 17% of those said 600 to 799 a month. 45 to 54s, 10% said 400 to 600, and the 55s and over were wanting to keep their costs much lower to around £200 a month. And younger people were far more likely to consider renting than older people were. So obviously there's quite a lot of stats there. There's a lot more I could have brought in, but I know that not everybody enjoys looking at the numbers as much as I do. So I've also brought some social stories in just to kind of help people to distill the essence of what I've been talking about. So the two things that really came out for me were there's 2 different types of households who might be struggling in the housing market, and they're struggling for different reasons, but with a similar end product, I suppose. So the first is a couple in their late 20s, early 30s, probably with young children, currently living in a 1 or 2 bed privately rented flat. They're trying to get a deposit or get a mortgage to buy their first family home, and they're struggling. They're trapped in that rent cycle where they can't get enough saved as well as still paying their rent to be able to get on the property ladder. And they're looking for a 2 or 3 bedroom, well, 3 bedroom probably family home. And at the other end, you've got a retired couple. The house is bought outright. They've got no financial concerns. They've got plenty of room, but actually they're starting to think about where they want to spend their last days, their retirement, and they want to move to downsize to a bungalow or a smaller 2-bed house, more manageable for them and free up some of their capital. So any questions?
Thanks, Danica. Yes, we've got some questions coming in, and I'll just ask you those.
Yeah.
What is the statistical margin of error in this survey, and what is the statistical confidence level of the outcomes?
That's a good question. I don't have it to hand, but I can find that and come back to you with that. It was done, like I say, by an outside agency, so I've got all that paperwork.
Okay. We've also got a question around the information about people under 45 not getting help with mortgages. And the question is that seems quite unusual in the light of unemployment on the island. Do you have anything else that you can add to that? It seems quite an unusual figure.
No, I was surprised by it. I think we need to look into it more. I don't think the survey gives us all the answers, but it certainly gives us a starting point for what else we would want to understand.
Okay. And another question is around, do you know if the key areas of deprivation on the island are adequately represented in the survey responses?
Yes, we did look at the distribution of the survey responses, and we were happy that it was pretty representative of the island. That's why we went out with that postal survey, because the self-selecting online one wasn't giving us that good overview.
Okay. We are being asked about getting more information on the survey, and I think we'll make that available after the event. Is that right, Danica?
Yeah, the intention is to publish this online as an interactive dashboard, so people can come and drill into it themselves and have a play with the data. That's what we're going to do, so we can circulate that probably in the next couple of weeks. That should be available.
And finally, there was just a question around how we're going to use this data and what the council will be doing with it.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think I'm going to defer to my colleagues in planning and regeneration to answer that. So probably Ollie and Paul would be best placed to come in on that one.
Okay, thanks, Danica. Ollie is going to be coming in next, so he can pick that question up and follow it through, and we'll move over to Ollie.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Danica. Well dodged in terms of that last question, but I think you're absolutely right to dodge that, and it is very much for sort of planning and housing to really take this information on. Indeed, I was really struck just listening to a lot of the information and a lot of the numbers that the debate can't just, when we talk about housing, it shouldn't just be about an overall number. It's really got to be about that understanding of what the needs are on the island and what we're actually trying to achieve. So hopefully everyone who's in on this meeting knows me. I'm on the slide there, but if we just move straight in to the bits of information and presentation slides I've got for you, please, Maisie. Thank you. So I don't want to dwell too much, because I think everyone in this virtual room is pretty well versed on what's been going on with the sort of progress of the island planning strategy, but just to recap in terms of that initial consultation, to give it a bit of context, we received 9,335 specific comments on the draft island planning strategy, and those are an awful lot of comments, especially when you have to go through them all, understand them, digest them, think about their implications, and how they result in any changes in what we're looking at doing, and whether that requires further evidence base, etc. But unsurprisingly, that consultation gave some big messages back, which I think most people would probably know, but it's useful to have it confirmed through the exercise. And they were around the housing number, the sites that were actually proposed for housing, who the houses were for, and whether they were affordable in the context of the island. So with those big messages that we got back, members asked us as officers to explore whether an evidence base could be established that was likely to be sufficiently robust to allow the draft IPS to be considered by a planning inspector through an examination in public, and that was predicated on a housing number lower than that advocated through the government standard method. That was quite a big ask of members to officers, because potentially, given the processes involved, there would be some serious risks if there wasn't an appropriate evidence base in place, that we could have at least a reasonable level of confidence that we could get to the examination. So following that ask, we commissioned a lot of further evidence work. The island-wide housing needs work that Danica has talked about was one of them, alongside housing delivery on the island, and working with the Chamber of Commerce, a review of the planning permissions and completions. And we're just getting to a point now where all those evidence documents are being finalised, and when you bring them all together and look at it, I think we do have a position that excuse me, that we can put forward, that actually our approach is less is more when it comes to delivery. So lower housing number, but a greater certainty and focus on delivery, particularly given the unique conditions that we see in the island standalone housing market. So that was where we got to out of the back of the consultation, but as with most things in this world, everything else doesn't stand still around it. So we've got a lot going on in the world of planning at the moment. We've got a changing national picture. Most people, I'm sure, would have seen Boris's position that the way out of COVID and any sort of recession is to build, and it's been a long-standing noise from the government that we would see a planning white paper this year. We understand that there will be a document published probably now around August. Whether it is a white paper or a more watered down consultation, public sort of views document, we don't know, but ministers are quoted as saying that it's going to be bold and creative, and they're going to be the most radical changes to the planning system since the Second World War. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. We've also got the new National Design Code, and that's, we're led to believe, on track for publication later on this year. A big thing for us, given the nature of the debate on the island, is that we're also expecting movement on the government standard method calculation for housing numbers. We're expecting something to come out from government in months rather than weeks. So that would be very interesting to see what pressure the backbenchers have brought to bear on that particular policy approach from the government. And also, if there are no changes, or at least when we look at the standard method as it currently stands, we are expecting the next set of statistical information to be published soon that will feed into the standard method, which invariably will give us a slightly different number than we've previously consulted on. So as well as that macro national level, we've also got our micro local picture. Stuff is changing around us on the island. The Isle of Wight Council as an organisation is in a different place now to when we published the IPS. There's been a lot of work done on environment and climate strategy. There's work being done around updating the corporate plan. We've got work getting the local transport plan off the ground. So I've got to think about how the IPS is reflective of all those other corporate policies and aspirations, and how it can help the delivery of them. Of course, the big thing for everyone, I suppose, in the world that they're trying to grapple with at the moment is, what does a post-COVID society look like, and what are the implications of COVID? And that's really interesting and relevant to me from a land use perspective. You know, what are the implications? Do we sufficiently understand them? And we've got to make sure that we really think about those and bring in a planning policy framework for the island that helps support longer term sustainable development. You know, there's some really big questions to be asked and answered at the moment. What, for example, what will the high street or the tourism sector look like in 12 months or even beyond? What does it need? Does it need any help from planning policies? How do we go about it? Do we want to plan for or even encourage people to move back to the island or move to the island from their jobs in the city, by way of an example, as the way in which people work changes? So for me, it was very clear that we had, just before the global pandemic hit, we had got ourselves in a position where we had a post-consultation plan ready, but the big question now is whether we have a post-COVID plan. And I think those of you who may have watched or listened to recent cabinet meetings would have heard our portfolio holder talk about the desire and need to really address those issues. And out the back of that, the announcement that we will be looking at the timetable for the IPS and pushing the consultation back. So I've got some work to do now to think about what that timetable might look like, and also the further work that is that's required to help inform that. So that's my update in terms of the IPS. So happy to take any questions that are arising from the virtual floor.
Thanks very much, Ollie. And yeah, we've got some questions coming in. The first question is around, when can we expect to see these policy changes come through into delivery?
Okay, well, that's the crux of it, isn't it? And that's the bit that everyone wants to know. But in all honesty, I can't really answer that at the moment. As I've just sort of set out, we will be working out what that timetable looks like. Just by way of reminder, the current local development scheme, so the timetable for the island planning strategy, anticipated adoption in September 2022, once we've gone through all the formal stages. So clearly, if we push the timetable back now, it's potentially going to be pushing back that end delivery date as well.
Okay, thanks, Ollie. The next question is, do you think more commuters to the mainland will work more of the time on the island at home, and therefore there could be more support for local high streets during the working day, as more people are shopping locally rather than commuting to the mainland as frequently?
Great question. And there's a lot to sort of unpick from that. So just thinking about those working patterns, yeah, I think a lot of people over the last sort of 3 to 4 months will have spent a lot of time working from home. I know I have, and that's going to have a changing long-term impact on my working patterns. I think we'll see a number of organisations realise that they don't actually need the office space in the traditional sense that they formerly had. It's interesting in that question that there was a link made to changing working patterns and people being on the island more, linking it to a positive impact on the high street. I would wonder about that, because I would wonder, if people aren't going over to the mainland to work, the chances are they're still going to be at home working, and whether they would automatically follow that they would then be going out to the high street over lunchtime, for example. But I think what that question does do is highlight that there are all these issues that we really need to have a really good think about.
Thanks. The next question sort of links back to Danica's statistics, and it's what can we do through policy to make it easier for younger people to buy properties?
Yeah, so again, this is the bit where we have to really look at that translation from that information to our policy approaches. So if I'm honest, I think there will be some real challenges around that from what we're able to legally do or not, but I think we will have to look at some of the nudge theory around it, if you like, through our planning policies, and be clearer about what we are expecting. And then again, if I'm being honest, really sticking to our guns when it comes to the implementation of the policies. So making sure that our policies ask for and support the delivery of the right type of products for the island that we want to see moving forward.
Thanks. There's a question which has come in about what the island's position is on the nutrient neutrality that is delaying schemes on the mainland, but the island is finding land to offset for mainland sites.
Yes, so the issue of nutrient neutrality is a big one in the planning arena in the Solent area, but primarily more so for our colleagues on the North Island. Now, their issue is that the majority of their wastewater is discharged into the Solent, which is a European protected site. Now, and they've struggled because they then don't have the land and ability to bring forward the mitigation that would be required to offset the impacts. The Isle of Wight is slightly different, and that's why we've not had to be in a position, for example, to put a moratorium on development where others on the North Island have. That's because the majority of our wastewater is pumped out into the English Channel through Sandown, away from the designated sensitive areas. So one of the big ways that government and its sort of advisory bodies like Natural England have sort of picked up on the offsetting is that the idea that the mitigation and the offsetting that is brought forward doesn't need to be within the authority boundary of the application or the development, but as long as it will have a direct positive impact or neutral impact on the designation, it could be elsewhere. So if just putting very simply, if we were looking at mitigation in a city environment, they're going to struggle for land to bring that mitigation forward, whereas that's not something that the Isle of Wight has the same problem with. So I'm aware that organisations other than the council, such as the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, have bought up farmland with the express purpose of using that as mitigation and working up a scheme or schemes that allow for the mitigation for mainland development to be provided on island.
Okay, and we've got one final question that's come in, clearly a interesting and popular topic. The question is, I understand the want and desire from members with regard to reducing the overall number, but are members aware of the gravity of the problem in terms of delivery on the island? Regardless of the number, be it 700 or 400, this is a massive issue with delivery. It is important that this is understood in the light of calls from some for a moratorium on development.
Yes, and I think the evidence base that we've assembled post-consultation really helps us paint a much clearer picture of the challenges and issues facing delivery on the island, and I would completely agree. It might be that people are aware there is a motion related to this issue going to full council this evening, so it may be worthwhile tuning in and listening to that debate and discussion, or to understand how that's going to be thought about moving forward. But that's part of my job, and other officers as well, is to highlight and talk through the challenges and risks associated with any particular direction of travel. But I think it does link back into that idea that I was talking about earlier of less is more when it comes to housing and delivery, and actually focusing on getting stuff built, because that's ultimately what we need to be about.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ollie. And I think we'll move on now to Paul Thomas.
Okay, just waiting to go live. Okay, so I'm Paul Thomas, Assistant Director of Regeneration. I think most people in the virtual room should know me by now. I suppose I've been here just about 12 months. So in that 12 months, I think we've had 4 of these type of conversations, and it's time to kind of up the ante a little bit on it, I think. So the backdrop and timeline to the housing strategy is most people know that we paused the housing strategy in the context that we had a final document, or version 6 or draft 6 of the document, and we'd finished the final public consultation before we went to members to adopt the strategy, bearing in mind that the housing strategy is not a legal requirement, it's not a legal document. And on the Isle of Wight, I've written a couple of housing strategies for local authorities before, and never have experienced the kind of debate and the constant public consultation and backwards and forwards of the actual drafts of the strategy, and very much about these debates about the numbers and so on and so forth, and where houses should be. So we had some pushback about the fact it hadn't gone for adoption from certain quarters, but really we had to pause it like every other local authority, because in the housing strategy we don't talk about the new normal, we don't design the recovery action plans. And the world has changed for construction, the world has changed for our high streets, and the world has changed for housing associations and councils alike. So essentially my challenge back to anybody who says, well, why isn't it adopted yet? I'd say, well, does your action plan account for the new normal as well? So really, I think it's now time to start revisioning our housing strategy. I think the good news is all the issues that the previous speakers have spoken about have been captured, and in fact the further evidence we've had on needs analysis and public consultation reinforces the information that we had previously. We've spoken previously about the polarisation between the younger working people of the Isle of Wight, if you like, and the older group, the more vocal group, who we tend to do most of the talking with. To inform a lot of these strategies, I would say, and these issues aren't new. But I think it also gives a lot of new opportunities. I mean, now is the time that we start thinking about the green and circular economies. These are the big selling points, I think, of the Isle of Wight. The digital by default, I think that's been covered to a certain extent by Ollie already, but really this is the future. So it's not just the open spaces. If you're digital by default, you have the opportunity to bring in these new employees, these new workspaces, and a whole different ways of doing business. So you can move away from just being the service industry or a farming industry or whatever else that the unique selling point of the island may be. And design standards, I mean, there's a lot of debate going on at the moment, not just about how many homes, but essentially, you know, design standards and what should be in new homes. Workspaces, even if it's on a landing, is a big debate within the housing sector. Increasing space, even for affordable homes, so affordable homes not being boxes, but actually having workspaces to engage people economically as well. You know about the climate emergency and zero carbon strategies. Against the backdrop, a challenging backdrop of finances, lots of local authorities are really thinking, well, the way forward is to bring forward these zero carbon homes now. Let's start doing the stuff we've been planning to do for 10 years now, and to take it forward. So, you know, my countenance really is space is kind of the new agenda, and the quality of the build rather than just building. So it's going to come with lots of challenges, isn't it? So We know the global stuff, so recession is predicted. 15% UK unemployment is predicted, and that's conservative. That doesn't take into account any, any ideas of a second spike of the virus. We know this year, Savills tell us that there's been a 30% reduction in homes actually completed because there was that stop in construction. There's a predicted 20% fall in house prices, but where? I mean, the obvious thing would be London and the inner cities, and maybe there'll be a slight increase or at least a levelling out in the areas such as the Isle of Wight, where people move to the countryside. I think it's not an urban myth that people are moving out of the cities. The estate agents will tell you that there's lots of interest now in homes in the countryside, wherever they may be, particularly in the southeast and southwest, where essentially space and digital economy are the drivers, alongside education, as much as what the houses are actually like. We spoke already about the huge increases in homelessness, already happened. I think, but the sorted is a little bit of a quip really, because I think a lot of people think homelessness has been sorted by the government's direction, just to get people off the streets throughout the period of the virus. But this goes against 20 years of policy and legislation that's basically gatekeeping homeless. So there's a lot of families out there, the sofa surfers, the people struggling to pay their rent, who are also homeless. And I think one of the big issues going forward is going to be that expectation now. Is a big expectation that local councils basically keep people off the streets, but start to dig into the real issues of homelessness, and that comes at a massive financial cost for councils. Probably at the worst time for a long time they've been able to invest in these services. So most councils are cash strapped for investment. It's an obvious statement. But there are groups of councils through the Local Government Association that are considering serving Section 114 notices on government, which is effectively a bankruptcy notice. I don't think the Isle of Wight's there yet, but essentially there's lots of local authorities that are. And our colleagues in housing associations and elsewhere are also changing their business plans, deciding on what areas and how much development they're going to be doing in the future and what kind of products they're going to be offering. So I think the island's got a few futures. I'll come on to that, but I think we really need to beef up the strategic and political leadership, and particularly in the case of pushing back this public resistance to house building. And there's some real entitlement cultures around stopping housing, if I'm honest about it, and stopping development. And essentially, that is kind of the culture of the Isle of Wight. It's an anti-culture that, we don't really want to see any more housing, but we want to have the benefits of, a better economy and so on and so forth. So we need to develop some real partnerships. So real partnerships is everybody's gaining, everybody's putting money in, and everybody's working together. So it's not just a council push, it's a pull as well. We have to attract investment from both traditional and new sources. Traditional sources, obviously, infrastructure funding through the LEPs and so on and so forth. And it's still a huge roadblock, and the pun is intended. It is a roadblock on the Isle of Wight. You build one house, you've got to build two roads. It's almost like a formula. And that's really because of 30 or 40 years underinvestment in the infrastructure. So it goes without saying, stating the obvious, increase the affordable home supply. I think we've done this one to death, haven't we? I mean, we've got affordability studies. You've seen Danica's evidence. We've really gone to town on proving the case for affordable housing, which could have been done in the first place if we just looked at the housing number and delivery. The argument's been about how many, but the point is, if you're building none, one's a bonus. And really, housing, I need to put it more into context. When I say I think we do. So create island sustainable communities. So it's not building houses for fun that we keep talking about. The housing strategy is part of the wider, creating a sustainable island. And so we've got to stop procrastinating about the strategies and, get on with some of the actions we need to do. So this is very much the so what debate. We've got all these strategies, but what are they actually delivering? So I've got a few visions there of the future. I mean, they're kind of mine in a sense, but you know, you can see the trends that you could make a case, or I'm sure you could write a dissertation on any of these future prophecies, if you like. So I think you know, the first one is like some areas in Dorset and elsewhere in the country. You know, the Isle of Wight could be a huge care village, you know, with some add-on tourism and farming. Now, I think you could argue with the, you know, young people leaving, older people coming in, that the constant trend over 20 years, you know, could lead to that situation. And the question is that good or bad, or is that something that we need to be aiming for? Of course, comes with that then is the sustainability about, you know, huge health and social care burdens at some point in the system. So you know, that's one potential future. What I've seen really in 12 months, and this is kind of the status quo in my mind, but you know, we've got steady decline, communities becoming more unsustainable, and I think there's also a risk of the council's Isle of Wight identity. I certainly I live in Bournemouth, and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole were fighting legally not to be joined together a little way back. But the financial situation of, you know, the population, about 1 million people there, you know, forced it to become one local authority, you could argue. So, you know, really, you wouldn't want to see a gradual decline. Well, I don't want to see a gradual decline, but that's kind of, you know, that is a possibility, particularly with, if we don't manage the recovery well, if we don't, you know, come up with better ideas and use the recovery as an opportunity to take the island forward. And I think the Isle of Wight does have a USP. It is green, it is tech, it has got the opportunity to develop a circular economy. It is a desirable place to live and work, and what really need a rebalanced age and jobs profile to make that a reality. So on 3, I mean, we have to bite the bullet on this one. This does mean attracting and importing people. It does mean bringing in wealth. It does mean soaking up some of these company headquarters that are disembarking from London. All these people have now found that they can work from home, you know, the professional classes and everything else. It does mean that there is opportunities for that wealth to come to the Isle of Wight. In my mind, you know, this is typical regeneration. It's nothing scientific. This is just basic regeneration, effectively. And it does mean, the really difficult one for people to swallow, it does actually mean building houses. And there is a fourth option, of course, is a mashup of all the above. So in different parts of the island, there is a potential for any one of those to play out. And several to play out at the same time. So I think it's certainly an interesting future that the island may face, but there are some real issues that we need to tackle together. So I'll finish there. Ooh.
Thanks, Paul. First question is, how does the housing policy relate to building regulations that are not asking for zero carbon housing?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not that in the detail of policy. In terms of, I think that's a planning policy question, really.
Okay, and the next question is, the government policy on evictions is due to change in August. Do you have any idea on how this will impact on the island?
If we look at Danica's information that most young people are renting, if we look at, I think it's not just the landlord stuff, is it? It's the people on furlough and so on and so forth. So effectively, as more people lose, you know, very simply, as more people, younger people, you know, this 90% plus of younger people that don't own their own home, that are in the private rented sector, presumably, then yeah, huge impacts, isn't it? It's a huge potential increase in homelessness and you know, fragmentation of the already quite weak housing market, I would say. So it's a major. It is a major.
Thanks. The next question, looking at your expected housing challenges slide, why do you think now is the right time to be asking for higher standards than building regulations on the island? Does this not impose further costs to developing on the island over that of our near neighbours and make our island less competitive?
Yeah, well, this is happening already. So this is not my ask. This is stuff that's coming out from all kinds of constructors, people who are selling houses, from housing associations. So there's a real national drive on this about the quality of housing. So this is not an Isle of Wight specific ask, and obviously, you know, people who want to develop and sell houses, I think this is going on to the next stage of marketing in effect. But you know, this is the architects. This is lots of pressure groups on government, and this is in the wake of the Grenfell stuff and the Fitness for Human Habitation Act and so on and so forth. So so this is the future, whether it increases costs or not.
Okay, the next question is a positive message that the council is understanding that we need housing from us. But what is being done by the council to support the housing market on the island?
Well, I think the council's committed and doing what it can. But if this is in terms of, you know, the council doesn't own loads of decent land that it can throw into the pot, the council doesn't have the investment that it needs to throw out there. So it's a difficult place. I mean, the good news, I suppose, is the council also, as unlike some local authorities, invested all its money in commercial enterprises, which are now also not delivering. So there's lots of local authorities at the moment that are struggling. But we are pushing hard. We are sort of bringing forward some developments. We are pushing some stuff through the planning system ourselves as a council, you know, on smaller sites, and we are kind of very much in the enabling role. I think, you know, we're not in the developing role really, because we don't have that kind of investment as a council. But we are, you know, trying to support development in any way we can, but the right development.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. I think we'll now move on to Matt, who's going to update us on the housing campaign.
Hello and good morning. I'm Matt Chatfield, so I'm the Communication and Engagement Officer allocated to regeneration. And although I've been spending a lot of time doing COVID, I'm also the Communication and Engagement Officer responsible for regeneration, and housing has been my thing for the last year or so. So those who've been to previous housing conversations will have heard me talk about the Building Together campaign, and now it's time to give an update on how that's going. Of course, the COVID crisis has caused some considerable change to the timetable. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So the initial concept, the initial idea was that we wanted to get something that would be run alongside all the statistics and plans and policies that we were producing. So already in this meeting today, we've heard about the island plan, and Danica has presented the results of the surveys, and we've gone into quite a bit of detail about what that means. That's the sort of information that goes out into the public domain and people debate it. However, the debates themselves are often not on the basis of those hard facts. They're quite often hearts and minds sort of debates, where people are debating more with their feelings and emotions than they are on the, you know, whether something's true or not. And this is something right across the board. It's not just a matter for housing, and it's not just a matter on the Isle of Wight, but the way a lot of public debate is now formed is on social media and in forums that perhaps are much less formal than we've been accustomed to. So we agreed along with our partners that it would be a good idea to do a campaign that would address that to an extent on the Isle of Wight. Now, clearly, a publicity campaign isn't going to be enough to completely change the mind of everybody on the Isle of Wight if they are all of one mind, but it's to aid in that discussion, to help move that debate on, and perhaps put a bit of a different slant upon it. So Building Together initially was for a series of videos, and these videos are to be presented on social media and hopefully shared by people. The idea would be to get people's true stories. So looking back to what Danica said earlier, she told a couple of social stories based on her statistics. I was looking for actual real people to tell those stories about themselves, and I found some. So with the help of partners who, thank you very much, gave me a number of suggestions, we tracked down some people willing to appear on video. Here is one of them, Katie, who appeared on the first video. This is one of the social media assets that we used to support that video. And we produced two videos. The first one was released early in December 2019, and that was supported by a social media campaign. Of course, the whole campaign has been delayed twice. Firstly, by the fact we had an election called last autumn, which we weren't expecting, and because of pre-election rules, we had to suspend the campaign then. So this ended up going out round about Christmas time, which was not when we'd planned it to be. And then by the time we got to the second video, it was COVID, and so then that also got delayed. So we do have a bit of an opportunity to refocus on how it's going to work, what we're going to do with this campaign. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do next. But first, I thought it would be a good opportunity to show the second video. Now, people who've been to the first housing conversations will have seen this first video with Katie on. So I'm not going to show you that one today. But if you want to see it, it is on YouTube. So you can go and see it on the council's YouTube channel, or just search for Building Together on YouTube and it should come up. The second one is not published yet. Some people I know at this meeting have seen it. Most of you will not. So I'd like to show you that second video now. It's a video of Ben Dyer. There we go. Right, that was the second video. It's yet to be published. So although we have shown it a couple of times to meetings like this one, we've yet to put that online. That video was aimed differently to the first one. So it's aimed looking at the business impact, the economic impact of having inadequate housing. So it's highlighting the fact that if you're a business owner, if you're trying to run a business, if you're perhaps running a tech business as Ben Dyer does, you need your staff and your potential staff to be attracted to the Isle of Wight so that they can buy housing or rent housing. And that's clearly an issue that has wider economic impact. So it's not just housing for yourself, it's housing for people who you might want to provide services to you. So we're now looking at taking the opportunity to refocus Building Together and bring it back and have another go, basically, because circumstances conspired against us completing the campaign. But as you can see, we've made a good start, and the videos have had a good reception where we've shown them. Certainly the one that was published did. But we think because of so much of time has passed since that first one went, we can basically start again on that. So we're intending a campaign relaunch later on this year. And I'm not going to say exactly when that's going to be, because we are going to be working closely with the Island Plan timetable and looking at other housing projects that we're expecting to come forward over the rest of this year. And I'm expecting that that's going to be sometime around the autumn, early autumn, I hope. We should be able to get something together and actually align the new Building Together second phase with that, so we can support those particular projects that are coming online. But it is very much going to be a partnership project, just as it was in the beginning. You know, the idea of this was inspired by the way people in the industry were feeding back information to us and saying, look, we need to do something about this side of the publicity. And so that was how the campaign was designed. And the delivery of it will also be alongside our partners. So we will need partners, many of whom I know are here in this meeting, to support us when we relaunch. And I'll be speaking with you, no doubt, about that in due course. But we want those messages to be amplified. People don't really expect to see information from the council and find it to be radical and interesting and new and innovative, unfortunately. Well, sometimes it is, but that's not their expectation. But if it comes from other partners, other trusted partners, other organisations, then it can have a broader credibility. It gets more like something that everybody's thinking, and people think, oh, maybe this is something we should be paying attention to. So we're looking for support on social media, particularly from our partners when they get relaunched. So assuming that goes well, we will be looking to redo relaunch those videos, but also I'm going to be starting to film the other ones. So we're hoping to finish the creation of the videos, which is obviously what had to stop during the COVID crisis. That should restart again as soon as I've got a contractor who's in a position to do that, which I believe will be very soon. And assuming that does go as planned, the next phases have always been and still remain a radio campaign and bus shelter posters. The reason for that is that looking at social media is one thing, but we also need to look at people who receive messages offline. So, and we found in the past that radio particularly and bus shelter posters, which are directly controlled by the council, are good ways to do that. So you might not look at Facebook, but you sure will be listening to Isle of Wight radio or getting on a bus, or one or the other, or even driving past a bus stop. So there's the building together is still going. We're still very much committed to delivering that Hearts and Minds programme, and I hope that partners will be happy to join with us when we relaunch it later on this year.
Thanks, Matt. One of the questions was around how are you getting the messages to hard to reach groups such as the young and those who are not online? I think you've answered that in relation to bus stops, radio and Facebook. So I think you've sort of covered off that question. But there is also a question around, will you be writing messages for us to share on our own social media?
That's a good idea, actually, and certainly we would intend to do that. Partners who want to join in with the social media, and yes, please do, thank you for that offer. We will be very happy to write text for you and make the assets so they're all ready to go. You can just cut and paste. So if any partners are interested in doing that, please get in touch with me or get your social media person to get in touch with me if someone else manages it for you. I'll be happy to provide you with assets when the time comes. The offer is appreciated. It will really help.
Brilliant, and thanks very much, Matt. We're now going to move back to Paul Thomas to just close the conference.
Okay, well, thanks to everybody who's attended today. I know it's virtually, not quite in a same format, and I personally prefer a crowd to be talking to and looking people in the eye and everything else, but hopefully that's a useful update for everybody. It's essentially, you can see from the strategy direction that we're going in terms of the regeneration strategy, the island planning strategy and the housing strategy. We've certainly had a lot of reasons to rethink some of this, particularly around the COVID, but also about some of the latest needs information. So essentially what's coming next is we're going to be looking at some community-led housing and how we can get on board and help delivery in the future. So this is another kind of housing product or housing offer, if you like, that we're interested in. And I think some of the early stuff from Danica has kind of refocused our minds on ownership issues, sort of young people owning their own homes rather than you know, the constant drive previously on social housing and affordable housing towards, you know, social rented housing, because obviously, you know, it's made us rethink some of this. So I know that first homes and starter homes and so on are unpopular in other parts of the country, but actually it's exactly what it seems that the Isle of Wight needs. So there will be some changing of all these strategies to start reflecting that and bringing these things forward. So thanks again for your time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.